Our Advent series this year will follow closely the daily devotions from Seedbed's wake-up call that are read every morning on Facebook at 9 a.m. Pacific time, either by me or by Don Garvin. And we're in our fourth year of doing the daily devotions. Can you believe that? 4 years every morning doing daily devotions, and nearly 4 years every morning doing our morning prayer time on Zoom as well. The pandemic has had a lasting effect on this congregation at the Fount. This Advent series is called Protagonist, Stepping into the Story of Advent. It's a series written by Matt Leroy and his brother Josh Leroy. And the series began this past Friday on December 1st, so we're now already 3 days into it. And then each week during Advent on Sunday through the morning of Christmas Eve, December 24th, I'll be sharing a message keyed to this series, using the words of Isaiah, whom the Leroys call the poet laureate of Advent, the prophet laureate, of Advent. We turn to Isaiah a lot during this season. So many familiar passages from Isaiah look forward to the coming of Christ. And the prophet casts a vision of the coming Messiah like no other. And today we're looking at Isaiah 64, verses 1 through 4, and the theme of stepping into the story. Next Sunday we'll look at Isaiah 40, verses 1 through 5, and the theme of the wilderness and the way. On December 17th, the third Sunday of Advent, the text will be Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 4, and the theme will be Jesus and Jubilee. And then finally, on December 24th at our 9 a.m. service, we'll look at Isaiah 9, verses 1 through 7, and the theme, A Story Only God Could Write. On Christmas Eve evening, we'll be joining with our sisters and brothers from Free Life Community Church to experience a holy night together for our Christmas Eve service. Let's hear our scripture for today again from Isaiah 64, verses 1 through 4. Oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down, so that the mountains would quake at your presence, as when fire kindles brushwood, and the fire causes water to boil, to make your name known to your adversaries, so that the nations might tremble at your presence. When you did awesome deeds that we did not expect, you came down, the mountains quaked at your presence. From ages past, no one has heard, no ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God besides you, who works for those who wait for him. Whenever we read in the Bible that someone tore their garments, you know that that means that they were in deep despair, shock, or mourning. It's a physical representation of what is taking place in their soul. In the Old Testament book of Esther, after Esther's uncle Mordecai learned that Haman had successfully convinced the king to basically sign a death warrant for all the Jews in his kingdom, we read this from Esther 4, verse 1. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went through the city wailing with a loud and bitter cry. Likewise, when Jesus was on trial before the Sanhedrin and announced his messiahship, we read this from Matthew 26, verse 65. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy." Isaiah is using the imagery of tearing apart in an effort to co-opt God into identifying with the despair and grief his people are experiencing. Isaiah pleads for God to mourn with us, to tear open the heavens like a garment. He is saying, look at the chaos of the world, Lord, and grieve alongside us. It's like tear open your clothes, God, but instead it's tear open the heavens. The New Revised Standard Version translates this tear open. Other translations, such as the NIV, the NASB, and the ESV, have the word rend. The Message paraphrase has rip open. Whatever the translation, the idea is that Isaiah is pleading for God to recognize the turmoil here on earth and to identify with his people in their angst. What turmoil, you ask? There was plenty, and there is plenty today. What grieves you? What causes you to mourn? The Israel-Hamas conflict? Ukraine? Drug abuse and overdoses? Division in the culture, in families, even in the church? Deaths, sickness, injustice? What do you long for God to do in relation to what grieves you? Isaiah wanted God to come down, to step into the world in a decisive way so that the chaos and evil would be eliminated. Isaiah wanted God to provide divine shock and awe, if you will. He didn't want God to just grieve over what is wrong in the world. He wanted God to set everything right. Don't just share our pain, cried Isaiah. Come and be active in healing it. I think Isaiah was thinking about the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. Isaiah wanted fire to come down from heaven to burn up the offering of his people's chaos and grief. Trembling mountains and falling fire. That's what Isaiah was calling for. He wanted the advent of God's stepping into the world's story to be an epic event of seismic proportions, complete with special effects. Isaiah did not want anyone to miss what was happening, and let there be no mistake, he wanted God to act decisively. And God did. God acted decisively, but not in the spectacular special effects way. There's an old story about Shakespeare. As Shakespeare contemplated his story, Hamlet, he realized that he could never have a relationship with the character Hamlet. He created the character, but he could never interact with Hamlet unless he wrote himself into the story. By Shakespeare writing himself into the story of Hamlet, he could have as much interaction with the character as he wanted. And God is the author of creation. But in order for him to enter into the story of creation, into our stories, he would have to step into the story and become the main character, the protagonist. That way, he can interact with his creation and develop the kind of relationship he longs for. And that is what he does. But he does so in the most unexpected way. The Jews of the Old Testament expected God to come as a conquering warrior. They expected a military leader who would defeat Israel's enemies and set up the kingdom of David again. They expected a lot of special effects, but instead, they got a baby. That's kind of what God does, the unexpected. Like Isaiah, we want the trembling mountains and the blazing fire. We want to see Mount Sinai and Mount Carmel again. But instead, as God often does, he totally flipped the script and came in the words of verse 3 of chapter 64, where it says, "When you did awesome deeds, that we did not expect." Our hearts cry out to God to come and wipe out the evil and set the world right. So he sends a baby. The world is so messed up and we are so divided that we cannot even talk, much less work together on solutions. We cry out to God for help, and God sends a baby. In the Old Testament, God repeatedly makes covenant with the Jewish people, with Adam and Eve, Noah and his family, Abraham and Sarah, Moses and the people of promise, David and the once and future kingdom. But God does more than make a covenant with them. At the dawn of the New Testament, he becomes one of them, one of us. God steps into our story. The author of all history writes himself into the story so that he can save it and us. Where are the places in your life right now where you desire God to step in? Relationships, finances, our church situation, unsaved loved ones, deep pain from loss? Do you have expectations of how you would like God to step in? Are you okay if he comes in rather unexpected ways? Or are you invested in God stepping in only in a particular way? Because unexpected or not, God's way is always better. We want undeniable glory, and God goes with the scandal of an unmarried pregnant teenager. We want the ground to shake, and he comes as a baby. And once again, we are reminded that Advent fulfills our greatest expectations in a way that we never expected. I invite you to follow the readings every day in the Wake Up Call devotional, either on Facebook at 9 a.m. Pacific time with me or Don Garvin, or on your own. You can subscribe to the email and get it every morning. You can listen to J.D. Walt as he reads it, audio-wise. There's lots of ways to connect, but I encourage you this Advent. We're not doing an Advent study per se, but we are going through this devotional together. So I invite you to follow it day by day. Next week, the sermon will be on the wilderness and the way, and it'll be based in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 through 5. Now let's spend a few moments prayerfully reflecting on what God may be saying to us today.